Joining me now, Republican political analyst and campaign consultant Tony Sayegh. Also Fox News contributor Daniel Hindenburg is deputy editorial page director for the Wall Street Journal. And Bernard Whitman is a former President Clinton pollster. All right, gentlemen, thank you so much for being here. So that is the question. Are we, that DeMint has posed it. Are we going to be a socialist European country? Are we going to be America? Put that to the side. What kind of country are we going to be? And is he right that that is, in part, what they're debating right now on Capitol Hill, Tony?
Well, it is if you think about it statistically. Just this year, we've gotten to 100% GDP to debt ratio. That means we produce almost as much as we owe. We got to a percent where 25% of what we produce in our GDP goes to funding the government. That's what you have in most of these European countries that actually practice socialism, as opposed to 20% 4 years ago. So, yes, statistically, that's the direction we're heading. I would like to be more positive and optimistic and think that we are the country of rugged individualism and resilience and capitalism, where if the government allows our system of the free market to thrive, we can pull ourselves out of it through the private economy. But the direction we've seen this government go in the last 3 years lends many to fear that that's where we're heading, that European-style system.
Do you see such a divide, Daniel, in the ideology between these two sides, that it is about more than just cutting $1.2 trillion?
Oh, absolutely. I think Senator DeMint is right in that the differences now between the two parties are absolutely profound. And it's beginning to, I think, sink into everybody in Washington that this is not merely about fighting over budget accounts and taxes, but that these two parties are in entirely different places. They've been going there for a long time. I would date it back to 1965 when LBJ passed the Great Society, Medicare, Medicaid on top of Social Security. We've now reached the point, and this was a debate over the weekend between Jeb Hensarling on the one point saying they wanted to rewrite the tax code in a way that would spur economic growth, and Jim Clyburn, who's also on the super committee, saying the Republicans have this idea that tax policy has something to do with economic growth. They're dreaming, which is to say the Democrats think taxes are to feed the level of spending that the government produces, while the Republicans are saying that it should be intended to spur economic growth in the private economy. The Democrats are in the public economy, the Republicans are now in the private economy, and this bridge is just not going to be crossed until the presidential election determines it.
Bernard, you've heard the Republican presidential candidates come out repeatedly and say, we don't have an income problem in this country. We don't have a revenue problem. We have a spending problem. We just spend too much. And they keep pointing back to the deal Reagan made years ago, where he said, okay, I'll take $3 in spending cuts for $1 worth of tax hikes. He says he got the tax hikes, but he never got the spending cuts. That's why the Republicans say they're so entrenched in it's not a revenue problem. The answer isn't to raise taxes. And it doesn't seem like the two sides will ever agree on that. So why are we to believe that they'll make any progress in the super committee or beyond?
I don't think that we will, and unfortunately, we are going to see these mandatory cuts. The problem is we have a reality problem. The American people are way out in front of the politicians on this. The American people are very, very clear. They want to see a mix of spending cuts, tax increases. Two-thirds of them want to see the wealthy who have done the best in this economy actually pay a little bit more to help fund programs to create jobs. The American people, two-thirds of them want to see defense cuts. Why? Because we need a leaner, meaner military that is more reliant on technological innovation and superiority, less reliant on manpower, which costs the most. My big concern in the administration is that I think Leon Panetta has gone over to the dark side on this. We've got to cut military spending. And finally, we do have to deal with entitlements. Social Security is the obvious one. Why? Because the American people, I think, are ready to accept a gradual increase in the retirement age. We are living much longer lives, much healthier lives, and much less physically demanding jobs overall now than when this program was put in place in the 30s and 40s. It just makes common sense.
And yet he does raise a good point that when you poll the American people, they're in favor of raising taxes, in particular on the wealthy. But that is anathema to these Republicans on Capitol Hill, just as touching Social Security, as Bernard points out here, is anathema to the Democrats. So even though the American public, maybe they're getting a little bit more open to these ideas, those on Capitol Hill seem to be digging in their heels, Tony.
Well, look, first of all, we agree we need to raise more revenue. It's how we do it that we disagree. Republicans believe you have a dynamic American economy that, if it grows, creates more tax revenue. In 2007, under the Bush tax cuts, we had the highest receipts of revenue to the federal government in the history of the IRS.
So the argument is if you lower taxes on the rich, you get more revenue.
Not the rich. rich,
government.
everybody. You lower the top marginal rates, you stimulate economic growth, the base increases. You eliminate loopholes and deductions, so you then create more sources from where taxes
What do the Democrats say to that, Bernard?
We simply
Tax the
cannot.
rich.
No,
That's
and here's
the
why.
response.
We simply cannot afford to give tax cuts to those people who have done better off than anybody
He's
over
saying
this
doing
economic
so
downfall.
leads to more revenue, not less.
It's
And it's-
simply,
and it's
it is
happened
simply-
historically in
it is simply
1982
and
not true.
in
The
2003.
gap between rich and poor has never been greater in this country, and corporate profits are at record highs. Yet corporations cannot manage to create jobs.
Corporations.
Because of regulations,
What
Bernard,
about
you know
guys
that.
who own their own companies? The Republicans were talking recently about dropping the corporate rate in the super committee from 35 to 25%. That creates a differential between the top marginal rate and the corporate rate, which is to say between corporations and guys who own their own businesses, of which there are millions in this country. And to say that raising their rates as part of the super rich and the 1% is going to create jobs in the country is obviously a contradiction.
I'm sorry, the idea that allowing the 1% to pay a little bit more because they've done better will somehow
But that's
cripple small
meaningless.
business is absurd. It's
What
just not
revenue
true.
does that
Most
create?
small
Because
businesses,
it doesn't create
most small
enough revenue,
businesses do
Megan.
not
This is the
make
whole canard.
millions and millions of
this
dollars.
This is the whole canard, Bernard, no pun intended. The reality is when you say raising taxes under the Obama and Democrats' plan, you're talking about people who you're talking about, those who make $200,000 and more. You call them the rich, but in essence, they're not really the rich. And then you've created this smoke screen by saying, well, really, it's only the top 1%. That's nonsense. Even if you confiscated all of the wealth of the top 1%, you would not make a dent in our deficit. So to propose that to people and say, well, if we just did that, you will be better off.
In conjunction with entitlement reform,
absolutely,
military spending cuts.
60% of our federal budget is absorbed by entitlement.
I'll tell you what they really need. They just need more cupcakes and Kashi Goleen bars from Senator Kerry, and then all will be well.
All will be well.
This is apparently
Not sure
how
if
they're
the
going to solve
FDA
it.
would agree with the cupcakes part.
Michelle Obama would.
This is how they're going after it. Gentlemen, thank you so much. Interesting discussion. Taking your thoughts on it as well at Kelly at FoxNews.com.